The Steelers are in for the 11th time in Mike Tomlin's 17 seasons as head coach. Pittsburgh makes the playoffs. The question is, how long will they be in the playoffs? They haven't won a playoff game since January 2017, you probably know. So all that's certainly top of mind, but the 3-game win streak at the end of the season means they at least have a shot at making a run at the 7th Lombardi Trophy in team history. I'm Matt Gajtka alongside Derrick Bell. Yes, we are talking Steelers football into the second weekend of January. It's definitely a privilege and a blessing, and we're happy to be with you once again here on the Steelers Now Pregame Scout. Derrick, the Steelers are the biggest underdogs of Super Wildcard Weekend, as the Bills are -10 at home, despite looking at a rather terrifying forecast, maybe over a foot of snow due to lake effect up there in western New York. Who knows what happens? Who knows how this all plays out as far as the conditions are concerned? But at the same time, this does feel like it would be a major upset, wouldn't it, if the Steelers do go up there and pull it off?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you got two of the, really hottest teams, honestly, coming into the playoffs, facing off this weekend. I know, the point spread and, kind of the narrative surrounding this game wouldn't really indicate as much, but, the Steelers coming in off a 3-game win streak. Buffalo, I think, has won 5 in a row now. So, these are both teams, 5-6 weeks ago that were probably more so looking at the draft order rather than the actual playoff standings. Buffalo ended up winning the division on that win against Miami in prime time. So it's going to be a really interesting game. Buffalo was a team coming into the season that, I pretty much had pegged as, Super Bowl or bust. I mean, that's just how talented the roster was. You got a superstar quarterback. They made some changes. Defensive coordinator, Sean McDermott calling the plays this year. They kind of pushed some chips in this year to make a Super Bowl run. So Steelers are definitely the underdog, but it's gonna be a fun matchup, especially with all the weather stuff we've got rolling into New York.
Yeah, the weather and also off the field in terms of who isn't going to be dressed for this game. TJ Watt, the biggest name, obviously injured against Baltimore last week in the playoff clinching victory against the Ravens. He's gone for, it looks like, at least a couple of weeks, maybe a possible AFC championship return if the Steelers do get it that far. They do get back Minka Fitzpatrick, though, and we'll talk about his impact later on the show. And, of course, we'll see Mason Rudolph behind center for the 4th consecutive game as Mike Tomlin sticks with the hot hand, to use his words. And I think there's nary a complaint throughout Steelers Nation about that. But let's look back at last week. Derrick, first here on First Down on the pregame scout, because it could be a preview in terms of game plan for what the Steelers are going to try to do. It was anything but pretty out there in blustery Baltimore. Cold rain might be my least favorite weather condition, and it certainly affected the play. It was a real grinded out type of affair, but the Steelers seemed relatively at home. They continued their success on the ground despite a couple of fumbles for Jaylen Warren. And overall, the Steelers obviously weren't as explosive in those conditions in Baltimore, but they got the big play, the huge touchdown from Rudolph to Deontay Johnson, and that was enough to pull off the win. And as you wrote this week on Steelers Now, the ground game has been arguably the team's biggest asset during this 3-game win streak. During that time, they're 3rd in expected points added per play on the ground and 2nd in run game success rate. So is this lining up maybe, at least this part of the game, for something that Pittsburgh has done quite well late in the season?
Yeah, you mentioned the weather, last weekend. That was kind of an aspect of the game that I really hadn't thought about much. Heading into last night when I was writing my kind of article on, how the Steelers were going to be able to win this game. And I didn't really put that together, but, the weather in Baltimore was so bad that, those rainy conditions or whatever, it kind of does give them a little bit of a practice trial run heading into this weekend. Who knows what Buffalo is going to be like? I mean, reports are all over the place. But yeah, I mean, I just think the blueprint was really there in terms of what the Steelers need to do to be effective on offense. You look at some of the numbers from that Ravens game. 47% rushing success rate. On early downs, it was 48%. I mean, the Steelers were able to pound the rock, stay ahead of schedule. I thought Najee Harris had one of his best games of his career against the Ravens. He had well over 50% of his runs successful. They played extremely well, man. And I was really impressed by the way that they did it. A lot of downhill runs, a lot of success on, split zone, some of their gap scheme runs. They scored a touchdown on trap. mixing it up. And I felt like, the offensive line really took it to the Ravens front, which, they were playing some backups, but a lot of their defensive linemen were their starters, and they were still able to kind of take it to them. That Ravens defense is a very good unit under Mike McDonald. So I think the blueprint, is going to be the same, and however crazy these wins are, I don't anticipate the Steelers wanting to kind of chuck the ball all around the yard. This is going to be a game where they have to rely on the run game. And I think, Najee Harris coming off back-to-back 100-yard games. I mean, he's in a groove right now. I think you got to establish that and kind of ride with the hot hand in that regard too.
Also, the Bills on the defensive side, as you wrote and as you researched, they use what's called a light box up front defensively about 60% of the time. That's one of the highest rates for a light box in the NFL this year. So, is the game plan for the Steelers, I guess, to try to punish that early on and then force the Bills to make an adjustment from there?
Yeah, so the Bills just primarily over the years, whether it's been with Leslie Frazier, with Sean McDermott, they like to play those two high safeties. They want to keep a lid, that shell coverage, as some of the commentators are calling it now. Keep a lid on the defense, make sure they're not allowing explosive plays. And really, what that means is, you see a lot of those like 4-2, 4-2-5 fronts. Their nickel, which has gotten a lot of praise over the course of the season. Teron Johnson, he's an excellent player, kind of Mike Hilton-esque in how he plays the run. He can blitz, he can cover, excellent player, and he kind of allows them to be really light in the box just because of some of the things that he can do in terms of taking on blockers, playing a run. But yeah, I mean, look, they play a light box on 61% of their runs. That's the second highest in the NFL. I mean, that's their game plan. They don't change really for nobody. They love to play nickel. They're not a team that plays really much base at all. And it kind of matches up what the Steelers want to do as well. The Steelers, I'm interested to see, they've been running a lot of 12 or 13 personnel. How do the Bills match that? Are they going to match that with base? Are they going to stay in nickel? Primarily over the course of the season, they've matched 12 personnel with nickel. So when the Steelers bring on Darnell Washington, they're still going to have a light box. And just some of the numbers too, with like how they've ran the ball in those situations with 6 or less guys in the box. Najee Harris averaging 5.4 yards per carry. Jaylen Warren averaging 5.7 yards per carry, according to Sports Info Solutions. When they've gotten these type of looks, you think it's some of the big games that the Steelers have had on the ground, they've been against teams that have played kind of these sorts of fronts. So it's going to be very interesting to see a nice chess match, I feel like, to open the game to kind of see, who's going to blink a little bit up front.
Are you surprised that Warren and Harris rate so highly when you talk about chunk plays, big plays down the field? Because neither guy really strikes me as the home run hitter, I suppose. They're not the type to really make you miss, but they've been able to still pick up these large chunks of yardage, despite being more like basic downhill runners. They're power guys. They're not so much nifty runners.
Yeah, I think that's been honestly one of the bigger surprises for me this season. Maybe not as much for Warren because we did see some big play potential from him,
Mhm.
but for Najee, I mean that just hasn't been a really large part of his game, really going back to college. But you just look at some of the numbers, like Pro Football Focus. I'm pulling it up right now. 14 breakaway runs of 15 or more yards. Different places categorize explosive runs. 12 to 15 yards is normally like kind of where they do the cutoff. But there's only 3 running backs that have more explosive runs this year than Najee Harris: Christian
Hmm.
McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, that's pretty dang good, man. Like those are some really good backs. And then you look at Jaylen Warren; he's got a dozen. So I think really it's a testament to some of the stuff that they figured out in the run game from a schematic standpoint, getting playing to those guys' strengths. I think everybody can see it, can feel when Najee kind of gets in a groove, it kind of always looks very similar. Like he's playing really downhill, he's playing really sure of himself, and just getting north. And I think you saw that really against the Ravens too. Like one thing that I've noticed too, a lot of people have had concerns like really over the past couple of years, like sometimes Najee missing a hole or two. But I think when you simplify things for him, his vision gets a lot better. Like when you basically allow him to get north quicker, I think his vision got better. I thought against the Ravens, man, there was times where he was playing with Patrick Queen with his eyes, getting him to jump at the wrong gap. So yeah, I am a little bit surprised by that. I don't know how replicable that's going to be season over season, but it's been a huge boost for them because they haven't created a ton of explosive plays through the air.
I don't know how many times we've seen over the past 3 weeks Steelers backs literally carrying linebackers and defensive
Oh
backs
yeah.
down the field. I mean, it's been a real study in drive and power, and it's been fun to watch. And in addition to the good blocking that they've gotten, and we've seen all the tight ends on the field. We've talked about that on this show. It's been a real massive humanity in a positive direction for the Steelers in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, with what we're
And
seeing as far as weather goes, I can't believe it's going to be that different on Sunday.
yeah, and just one, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think I highlighted the offensive line's play. Especially the guards. I feel like the guards are playing extremely well right now. James Daniels, Isaac Samalo, but really have to give a shout out to Pat Fryermuth, Darnell Washington. Both those guys has been blocking their tails off over the past month, especially during this win streak. Man, like Fryermuth, he has received, in my opinion, deserved criticism over the course of his Steelers career for his blocking. Sometimes that's been effort related, but more often than not, I feel like it's just, more of his body type and his play style. But he has been a legitimately solid blocker for the past month. And I really want to highlight that because as much flack as he's been given, you go back and watch that touchdown run that I broke down for my YouTube channel for Najee on the second drive of the game against the Ravens. He drove the safety like 8 yards in the end zone. I mean, that's awesome. You talk about how to create explosive runs. You get that type of blocking from your tight ends, from your receivers, everybody playing together like that. It's critical. So, Darnell Washington, Pat Fryermuth, excellent job. Definitely commendable.
All right, let's move to the other side of the football because, like I said, no TJ Watt this week and possibly next week if the Steelers do advance. MCL sprain for TJ certainly puts a damper on expectations on the defensive side of the ball, at least on the face value of it. But really, when you dig deep, should it limit the expectations? Because as you wrote this week, again on Steelers Now, go to snplus.com, or pardon me, snplus at steelersnow.com for Derrick's articles there as he breaks things down. The Steelers' pass rush unit was their strongest unit this season, first of all, and it's not a one-man show. Actually, the numbers this year with Watt on the field and without, it's a limited sample, as you admit, but they're very comparable numbers. And in fact, in some cases, slightly better with Watt off the field compared to last year. When you talk about rates and pressure rates and yardage allowed, that sort of thing, it was definitely a lot worse in 2022 when Watt did not play or was on the sideline compared to this year. So they did a better job of not just being all about TJ Watt when it comes to the pass rush. So how have they done it? That's my basic but also complicated question to you. How have they done it with this unit that we've talked about has fleshed out in terms of depth?
Yeah, I always think that it's nice to see teams address weaknesses year over year. One of the things that really bugs me is when organizations have the same weaknesses in consecutive years. And I feel like you could see that, why he missed those, however many games he missed last year. They were throwing guys out there that just respectfully were not NFL caliber players. And that has been a theme over, 2021, 2022. And you felt that in his impact. The Steelers' record is what it is without Watt. Look, he's one of the best players in the NFL, Defensive Player of the Year candidate. The best player on this team. But having said that, they made moves to make sure to put them in a situation where if he does suffer an injury, like you have some type of backup plan. Bringing in Marcus Golden for the cheap. Marcus Golden can still ball, man. Like I think that people really need to go back and watch like the Seahawks game. I was rewatching this week for that article I wrote. He beat Charles Cross, and I think Charles Cross is a pretty good player. I know he's been a little bit banged up, hasn't played as well lately. But he beat Charles Cross on 3 straight plays. Like he was dominating when he was in the game in a limited sample size. And then Nick Herbig, he gets a strip sack against Cross in that Seahawks game. And, we've seen flashes of him, when he's been out there and allowed to rush the passer, he's been really productive, like on a per snap basis. We just haven't seen a lot of it, because Highsmith, Watt, those guys play a ton of snaps really on their own discretion. So I think, they've addressed that as a need. And I think that's really the big difference, man, like has been, the guys that they have out there have just been a lot more capable, have provided a lot more juice. And you see that in the numbers. And I think that's why it gives me a little bit more than just like blind optimism. It gives me a legitimate like proof of concept that they could potentially, hold steady and not just completely collapse without Watt in the lineup.
Let's talk about Alex Highsmith in particular, because you note that his pressure rates are up. He's arguably on a per play basis better than last year, even though his sack numbers are down. So, yeah, the box score digits aren't quite where we thought they might be for him. But at the same time, could you argue he's had a better season here in 2023?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I'm every single number except the sacks are up by a substantial amount. Like you just look at like pressure rate, win rate, all that stuff. Alex has had a fantastic season, and I know a lot of people, on Twitter, whatever, are only going to look at like the box score numbers because the sack numbers have been split in half. But man, you can go back and watch even the Ravens game. That first sack that TJ got, that was because Alex. Alex beats the left tackle around the edge, forces Hundley to step up, and TJ's working inside, and basically the quarterback just steps right up into his arms. I mean, those type of sacks, they don't give assist in the box score, but they probably should. That would be something maybe we could look at. But he's created constant havoc. I mean, there were times where he was flushing Hundley out of the pocket as soon as he was hitting his back foot. What that does is, like, people say, like, oh, well, does it really matter if you don't get the quarterback, or you don't hit the quarterback, whatever? Well, if the quarterback hits his back foot and you force him to roll out, that cuts the field in half. That takes him away from his progression. Now he's put into chaos mode and having to scramble, make plays on his legs or with his legs. That stuff matters, man. When, especially as a quarterback, when you're constantly worried about what's on, your blind side, that really matters. And Deion Dawkins, the Bills left tackle, he's been around a long time. He's a powerful dude, bigger tackle. I'm really interested to see that matchup because Dawkins has played exceptional this year. I want to say that he's only allowed like a couple of sacks on the season. So that matchup's going to be huge. And this is one of the reasons why you pay a second pass rusher this amount of money, right? You had that kind of fail safe. If one of the guys goes down, you expected to pick up the slack. And this would be an excellent week, for some of those numbers to kind of even out and some positive regression. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But I'm optimistic, man. I think Haspel's had a really, really good season, and I think he's still, trending upward, which is, encouraging.
And what you're feeling on the tactics when it comes to rushing a quarterback like Josh Allen, who can get out of the pocket, make some plays, also can hurt you running the ball, literally. He's not a scrambler. He's a runner at times as well. So does that put an added emphasis on discipline in the pass rush and making sure that you're not just teeing off without regard to trying to control the guy, contain him?
Yes, very, very, very important in terms of rush lane integrity. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week with Hundley, just some of the times, and we saw Hundley get out of the pocket a couple of times. There was one play in particular where I think one of the edge rushers spun inside and he escaped through the back door. And look, Allen, he will go into creator chaos mode really at his own volition, like whenever he feels like it. So even if you do have good rush lane integrity, like he's that type of athlete to where he'll get where he wants to go regardless. The big thing is just don't make it predictable for him. And what I mean by that is, Alex in particular, Nick Herbig in particular, speed rushers. So if you're constantly going outside shoulder or running yourself out the play, tackles really, they're trying to basically protect at that like 9-yard mark from the ball, from where the ball snapped. That's the depth of the pocket. And like that's really important because like if you start going 10, 11 yards and letting those tackles push you upfield, he's just going to take one hitch up and escape. And when he gets out of the pocket, he's almost more dangerous than he is when he's in the pocket. Like Allen's one of those rare guys that can beat you from within. He can beat you with his legs. He can beat you from without the pocket. So you talk about like minimizing big plays. You want to really keep him in there and make it uncomfortable for him. And really a big part of that I feel like not a lot of people talk about beyond like the rush lane aspect of it is just guys working in unison. So if like one guy's consistently winning, but the other three aren't, that's going to give him easy escape avenues. If you have multiple guys winning on the play, it clouds, the quarterback's vision, makes it harder for him to kind of go into playmaker mode. So big test for the Steelers defense. We don't know really how much the Bills or the Steelers are going to throw the ball in this matchup because I think it's going to be weather dependent. But the Bills, passing attack is lethal, especially when Allen's on and he's, kind of in rhythm.
Well, let's tie that into third down. I watched the game between the Bills and the Dolphins last week, and Allen's throwing balls up for grabs early on. I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is a good situation for the Steelers if the Bills can find a way to win. But then, of course, he makes his requisite plays and makes plays that no one else can make. He reminds me of Ben Roethlisberger a lot in that kind of way, and now we're seeing it on the other side as the opposition. So it doesn't feel so good when he's not on your team. But at the same time, he is susceptible to turnovers, to head scratching interceptions. The Steelers overall finished a +7 in interceptions. They picked off 16. Their quarterbacks threw just 9 on the year. So turnovers, when you talk about big plays, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. So from the turnover side of things, Minkah Fitzpatrick returns, doesn't have a pick yet this year. He's been off and on the field, pardon me, due to injuries. So is this lining up for the Steelers to have a chance to have one or two of those moments that can take a game that looks like it's going one way and flip it the other direction?
Yeah, I think, Bills fans would be the first ones to tell you, the best thing about Josh Allen is that the majority of the time, he's the best player on the field. And he's like almost like a one-man army who's capable of, really just carrying the entire offensive unit on his shoulders. I mean, he could run, he could throw. I mean, you could utilize him in the design run game. He could do everything. All right. I also think like one of the underrated things about Allen is, he's number one in terms of the amount of pressures that have turned into sacks this year. He's excellent. Like we talk about all the bad plays in terms of, the turnovers and some of the craziness that he plays with. He is really good about minimizing like negative plays in the pocket in terms of taking sacks. Like sacks kill drafts. We see that all the time with the Steelers, like how they like to play, how they like to get teams behind the chains. Allen's one of the best or the best in the league in terms of minimizing that exposure. Now, having said that, the great thing about Josh Allen is like his arm is unbelievable. There is not a throw that he cannot make. That's the most overused cliche. Y'all have probably heard me say this before. It's the most overused cliche in terms of evaluating quarterbacks, but Allen is one of the very, very few that it actually fits the description. Having said that, he can be overconfident. Like the Bills have also had some like weird miscommunications, like with him and Gabe Davis. They just are very volatile on offense. They will give you chances to turn the ball over. Talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick, coming back into the lineup. Somehow, I can't even really believe that I typed this out today, but Minkah doesn't have a forced fumble or interception on the season. Like, again, we talk about some things like positive regression. This would be a heck of a time to get that first turnover with him coming back into the lineup. I'm excited to see what Minkah's kind of impact on the game is. The Bills are also the number one team on third downs, but I'm interested to see if the Bills do go spread and the weather kind of allows for a little bit of passing in this game, how the Steelers play their safeties now that they got like everybody healthy, Patrick Peterson, Eric Rowe, Devontae KZ, how that kind of distribution of labor works. So it's going to be interesting, but I do think like this is the time where Minkah, without Watt, you're looking for somebody to make like one or two of those game-changing, game-breaking type of plays. This is the time for Minkah.
And how about on the offensive side? When you talk big plays, George Pickens is the guy you go to, but of course we saw it last week with Deontay Johnson as well. So if the weather does permit, I guess put a big asterisk by this question, but if the weather does permit, the Steelers offense has developed the kind of balance now where it does open up things down the field more than it has. And also you have a quarterback who has proven capable of putting those deep balls on the spot. Even early in the game against the Ravens, I thought he threw a great deep ball down the sideline to Johnson, but he just couldn't quite locate it. Maybe it was a rain thing. I don't know what happened there, but it seems like Rudolph has been able to just continue to pick up where he left off as far as Oklahoma State goes, back when he was throwing those bombs. That's why he became such a great prospect, or one of the reasons why he became a good prospect for the NFL draft was that. So is that lining up to maybe have some opportunities down the field?
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. Like, regardless of what the weather is, the Steelers are going to need to find some sort of way to create some explosive plays. Now, whether that's 1 to 2 deep balls from Rudolph down the field to George Pickens, maybe it's a back shoulder, maybe it's George or Deontay taking a slant to the house. I mean, they're not going. Buffalo's defense. Just the way that they play, especially like with the type of coverages that they play a little bit of everything, but they really prefer to, like I said, keep those two safeties back. Most of their coverages involve, keeping like a shell or covers like a basically umbrella over the defense, or over the offense, excuse me. So it's hard to create those explosive plays down the field, but you're going to have to, like, Rudolph's going to have to make 1 or 2 plays. We saw that really last week against the Ravens. The weather was what it was, but, Rudolph made that nails throw to Deontay Johnson, who takes it, 70 yards for the house. They're going to need 1 or 2 of those plays this game. That just is what it is. I think that they will be able to run the ball in Buffalo. Throwing the ball in Buffalo is doable. You'll have to pick your spots and kind of manipulate and kind of dink and dunk down the field. It does help that Buffalo's a little banged up in the secondary. We'll have to see who plays for them. But yeah, I mean, the explosive plays, we already talked about the explosive run element of it. It'd be nice to get a couple of those explosive runs from Harris and Warren as well. But it's going to be interesting to see, just kind of the chess match and also like how the weather affects how both these two teams play. Because I think, the wind element of it isn't going to bother Allen as much as it will Mason. Just because of Allen's, unbelievable. He has that elite arm strength. But I still think you got to give Mason at least a couple chances, to kind of throw the ball down the field and, get the ball to your best player.
Okay, let's move on to fourth down. And before we talk predictions for this week, I do want to talk big picture on the season because all year long, Derek, I just never quite felt like the Steelers were a playoff caliber team just because they seemed limited at the most important position on the field, that being quarterback. And we can talk about the whys for Kenny Pickett and the hows when we work into the offseason. And I'm sure the Steelers brass have already started their breakdown of the season, at least a little bit here, as they look ahead to how to rebuild this or continue to build this team. And the post-Ben retooling plan, it's gone in fits and starts here. But when you see what competent QB play has done for this squad late in the year, you start to feel like they're not that far away. Obviously, there's a lot of permutations and machinations to happen in the offseason here regarding what becomes of Mason Rudolph, what the Steelers do regarding Kenny Pickett's status. Is he the starter? Is he a backup going into next training camp? A lot of stuff's going to happen, and we're not even into the first playoff game here. But I do want to take this opportunity before we do wrap it up to just discuss this. Where do you think they're at after you've seen this team look actually quite dangerous in the home stretch of the season?
Yeah, I mean, look, small sample size aside, the Steelers just over the past 3 weeks, they've been really good on offense, and there just hasn't been very many times over the past however many seasons that we've been able to say that. They're fifth in success rate, fourth in EPA per play. You can say what you want about the defenses that they've played during that stretch, but they've been legitimately good. And I'll just say this: I think I've said this on Twitter, but this has been a really gentle but to the point reminder that the Steelers have some players on offense. Like, this is not a offense. Look around the league. There are some offensive units where it's just like the cupboard is completely dry. Like, you need to start over at multiple spots. You need multiple offensive linemen. You need multiple playmakers. You probably need a young quarterback to throw in there. You probably need to look at a different play caller. This is not the case with the Steelers. Okay. They have some good pieces. I think they have some good pieces up front. I think both of their guards are really good players. I think Broderick Jones is going to be a good player with time if they get him in the right situation. I think they have multiple really good weapons. I think George Pickens is fantastic. I think Deontay Johnson is really solid at what he does. The backs have been really the staple of this offense all season long. I think Harris and Warren have played pretty well all season. It just really comes down to the quarterback play and who the offensive coordinator is going to be. And I think this is going to be a fascinating offense or fascinating offseason. My main concern is I just want them to make sure that the Steelers are going to make the playoffs here. Let's just say, for example, they go in here, they lose to Buffalo. It is how the Vegas expects it to play out. They lose by double digits, whatever. I still think that you can kind of parlay a little bit of this goodwill. You make this, improbable playoff run, go to the playoffs. You lose to a better team. It is what it is. But you can still say, okay, down the stretch, we found a little bit of identity. We see how this could be if we get good, competent quarterback play. Let's push the chips in, be aggressive. And that's what I want to see them do. Now, will they do that? We will see. I have no clue what the organization is thinking about in terms of like what the offensive coordinator or quarterback situation is going to be next week. I do think that those conversations change. If Mason Rudolph comes in here and plays exceptional today, this weekend against the Bills, I'm not really ready to push my chips in to say like, okay, he needs to be the starter or anything like that next year. But if he goes in and plays extremely well against Buffalo and gets them their first playoff win in 6-7 years or whatever, I think he makes a good case for that. I mean, even as much as crazy as that sounds with the small sample size. But I just think I want to see them be aggressive. I just think that the defense being what it is in terms of age and, Watt, Fitzpatrick, guys in their prime, Alex Highsmith in his prime, Cam Hayward, we'll see what his decision is next year if he comes back. But they've got a lot of good players, man. I just think they're a quarterback and a functional offense away. And this offseason is going to be, incredibly interesting from that standpoint for me. But hopefully they're aggressive. That's all I'll say.
I'm definitely more bullish now, just seeing what they can do when a quarterback is making just NFL average plays. And you see some of that come out late in the year. You see the potential come out. And we already knew the defense was playoff caliber. I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think the offense can certainly be too, with some tweaks, with some changes, and maybe the maintenance of one of those guys. We'll see if Mason Rudolph is interested in coming back, because it might be an interesting option for them going into 2024, believe it or not. Never thought I'd be saying that, but
And
here we
and
are.
another thing too, like we talk about, just the future and stuff of, the Steelers offense and whatever. I mean, this will be a good experience because you're getting these guys kind of some playoff exposure, but this is going to be excellent. This past month has been excellent for Mason Rudolph. I think you can kind of see it when you listen to his interviews. He's playing with house money, man. Like, he's third string quarterback. They didn't sign him till late in the offseason. You know, we everyone was completely blindsided by this, and no one expected him to be the guy that would lead the Steelers to the playoffs. He's made himself a lot of money, regardless of what happens this
Mhm.
weekend. He's going to get a nice little backup quarterback contract somewhere, if not in Pittsburgh. So you got to be happy for him and his success. But this is the kind of like statement win, as the Steelers are legitimate underdogs in this matchup. This is the kind of statement win that could make them seriously kind of pivot, or at least ponder pivoting to him as the potential bridge quarterback or short term option, or maybe long term option. We'll see. But like I said, he's playing with house money, man.
That's why we like sports. Guys get a chance to prove themselves on the field of
Yeah.
battle there, and there's no politics holding him back now. He's just out there playing and doing as well as any Steelers quarterback has in the last, I would say, 3 years, even counting Ben's last season.
Yep.
All right, is it going to happen? Do the Steelers beat the spread? They're 10-point underdogs against the Bills, and do they win the game? Do they go up there and steal one from Buffalo?
I'm not willing to predict that they're going to win the game. I do think that if the Steelers are able to run the ball, I think it'll be close. Just because I just look at the way that the Bills are structured on defense. I think the Steelers' run game matches up pretty well with that. There's been a lot of talk about whether the weather helps the Bills, helps the Steelers. One thing to point out, I do think it helps the Steelers in how they want to play. The Steelers want to make things as ugly as possible. They want to muck it up. This needs to be a chaotic game with turnovers and just a grounded out kind of affair. But Buffalo is used to playing in this weather, like that. This kind of stuff, maybe not like this winter storm type of weather, but this type of stuff does happen in Buffalo from time to time. So there's a lot of guys
Yeah.
out there that are probably more used to this than we're giving them credit. But I do think it'll be close. I think the Steelers have a chance at covering the spread. My biggest concern here is if just some of the times that they played Josh Allen, particularly. I went back and watched the game last year, different teams, but a lot of the same kind of main characters. If the weather's good enough for them to throw the ball, I think that this Bills offense, it's lightning in a bottle. So if it gets out, like, they can easily go up very quickly. They can put points on the board in bunches. The Steelers cannot afford to get down early in this game. They have to come out. They have to keep this close early to at least give them a fighter's chance. They're just one of those teams, man. It's like they just won't die. And if you can just keep this close and muck it up, make it as ugly as possible, give yourself a chance in the second half. That's kind of the formula, along with all the other stuff we talked about in the podcast, in terms of pulling off the upset. So I'm really excited. Hopefully you guys enjoy the game, and hopefully the result is what you want it to be. Like I said, house money, man. Nobody should be nervous or anything like that, because they are the underdog. Nobody's picking them to win. So I'm excited about it.
If you look at the season on the whole, if you factor in preseason expectations, yes, I get why the Bills would be favored by double digits here. If you factor in the last month, I think it should play out a lot closer. It just depends on how much you think home field is worth, and how much you think the weather
Yeah.
might limit possessions. And the fewer possessions there are, the fewer opportunities there are to make a big play. You'd think would favor the underdog. I'm not sure it does necessarily in this case with the Steelers, as we talked about. I think they keep it to single digits, but I don't think they win the game. I'll put
Yeah.
it that way in this case, and we'll move on from there. But they should have you riveted from 1 to 4 p.m. on Sunday, maybe even on to 4:30 or 5. I guess we'll see. That would be a lot of fun. When's the last Steelers overtime playoff game? I don't know. It's been a long time since one of those. I can't even
Want to
remember
say,
one.
yeah,
I was
I'm
looking
trying to
back
think
at
off the
their
top of my
recent
head.
playoff history.
Oh, Tebow.
Gee.
Is it Tebow?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That might be the
Broncos
last
game.
one. Yeah, I've blocked that one out apparently for good reason.
Yeah, I've tried to put that
2011.
one like way back in my head as well. I'm still scarred as a teenager from that one.
Yeah, right. But anyway, that was more than a decade ago, so we can call that ancient history in this case. All right, Derek,
Yeah,
had a good time. We kind of did our goodbyes last week because we didn't know if we were going to be back on the show. But again, it
yeah,
has been a great experience for me. I've had educational moment here every week with you on the Steelers Now Pregame Scout. So thank you again for sacrificing your time to spend a half an hour with me every week.
yeah, absolutely, man. Excellent. It's been awesome chopping it up with you. Definitely appreciate all the listeners. Listen to me and Matt ramble on about the Steelers and try to give you guys kind of a unique perspective to the game every weekend. Um, but yeah, it's been awesome. Hopefully you guys enjoy the weekend, and hopefully we'll back for maybe another surprise episode next
Mhm.
week. We'll have to just see.
And thanks again to Alan and Nick and Ed and everyone there at SteelersNow.com as well. For the full breadth of coverage of Steelers Bills, go to SteelersNow.com and follow them on social media at PGH Steelers Now. And here's our social media handle, Steelers_DB for Derek, and just plain Matt Gajtka for me. We'll talk to you, who knows, next season, next week. We'll find out. Until then, enjoy the football.